So joining me now is Representative Khanna from the great state of California. Representative Khanna, good to have you here.
Great to be back on, Cenk.
All right, so you are a campaign co-chair for Bernie Sanders. So you're very early in the campaign. I don't know this. Are you the first congressperson to endorse Bernie Sanders?
I am, other than his home state, Congressperson Peter Welch and Senator Leahy. We endorsed at the same time, but he has the support of both of his home state congressperson and senator.
Right, that makes sense. And so in a sense, I'm sorry to do this to you, but that would make you his Jeff Sessions. Now you're not going to recuse yourself from anything, are you?
Exactly. I don't want Bernie Sanders mocking my accent in some speech to Democrats.
Okay, so in all seriousness, so why endorse so early, and why be Senator Sanders' campaign co-chair?
Well, what I tell people is there are a lot of candidates in the field who would make a fine president, but there's one candidate who would make a transformational president. And I think you and I have talked about this. I've talked about this with David Sirota. He will be transformational on foreign policy. There will be no unconstitutional wars under his administration. He's going to have far greater restraint and respect for human rights. And he will be transformational on economic policy. He's finally going to have an economic agenda that helps working families, that helps people get into the middle class, that isn't tailored to shareholders and investors and the financial elite.
So you mentioned foreign policy first, so let's go there. So you guys work together on a resolution about Yemen. So where does that stand right now in terms of the House and the Senate?
Well, believe it or not, we passed it through the House, we passed it through the Senate, but for a whole bunch of procedural reasons, which I won't get into, it has to be done again. So they're going to pass it in the Senate tomorrow or Thursday, and then we need to repass it through the House, which we will the week after we're back in recess, and then it will go to the president's desk.
So that's almost certainly going to happen, that it's going to be brought to Trump?
I mean, you never can say for certain in politics, but I'm very, very confident that we have the votes in both the Senate and the House. And it would be the first time in history that a bill has passed both the House and the Senate. It's already the first time in history that a bill has passed the House and the Senate that's a war powers resolution. But it'll be another first when it goes to the president's desk. No war powers resolution has ever gone to the president's desk before.
So that's weird, because the two folks that I keep hearing are not practical enough to work with the other side are Bernie Sanders and you, but yet somehow you got this to pass through the Republican Senate working together, and got a lot of Republicans on board in the House as well.
We did. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, this is why I lead with this issue for Bernie Sanders. He's gotten something very consequential done. I mean, no one has been able to do it since 1973. It's addressing the greatest humanitarian disaster in the world right now. Almost 14 million people face famine. I was with Martin Griffith yesterday, who was the UN envoy there, and he said that if we don't end the Saudi blockade and if we don't increase aid to $4.2 billion, we're really going to see one of the world's worst famines. So he's gotten this done, and he's gotten it done working not just with Republicans, but working with Democratic leadership. You don't get anything passed through the Senate or the House if the leadership is opposed to you. So this idea that Bernie Sanders can't build coalitions or doesn't understand how to work with leadership is just bogus. Here's what Bernie Sanders understands, that to get leadership to work with you, to get Republicans to work with you, you don't do that from the inside. You do it from the outside. You first build a popular movement. You first mobilize folks on the ground, and that leads to successful action in Washington, D.C. So his model is inside out as opposed to, outside in as opposed to inside out. And I think that's what confuses folks.
Yes, but you mentioned Democratic leadership there, and so let's get into a little bit of uncomfortable grounds.
Sure. I always know we do that when I come on your show, Cenk.
I know. So they're not huge fans of the outside-in strategy, and they don't love being pressured. I guess that's somewhat understandable. It's human nature. But Nancy Pelosi just yesterday said that she's not considering impeachment at all. I don't want to put words in her mouth, so I don't want to say that she said it's off the table, but she's certainly not considering it. Given that there are a lot of improprieties, and not just improprieties, but potentially illegal actions that Donald Trump has taken, including what you uncovered in the congressional hearings of Michael Cohen, where the Trump organization seems to have clearly done financial fraud. Is that an advisable strategy to not consider impeachment at all?
I don't think it's advisable, and I don't think it needs to be bipartisan. I think if she had said what she's always been saying until yesterday, that we need to look at the reports, we need to look at the evidence, we need to get constitutional scholars like Lawrence Tribe and Akhil Amar and Bruce Ackerman and others to testify in front of Congress and see whether it constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors, and see what the constitutional precedent is that we'd be setting, especially knowing that we may not get a conviction in the Senate, but what their advice would be, given that we know that there were likely crimes by this president and certainly involvement in a criminal conspiracy. That would be, I think, fair. Instead, I think she was a little too dismissive of impeachment, and we have a constitutional duty to see this through the evidence and have hearings regardless of the politics.
Do you know if anyone is following up on the questions you asked about financial fraud of Michael Cohen? Because your questions seem to be, and his answers, more importantly, of course, well, you were the only one that brought up this particular angle during the day, seem to be fairly devastating about them assigning different reasons for the checks that they were giving out at the Trump organization. So do you know if anybody's following up on that?
Well, Cenk, I think it was absolutely devastating. I mean, Cohen testified that the president is sitting in the Oval Office. Imagine this, in his first year as president, and he's writing checks to this lawyer trying to cover up for the money that Cohen gave Stormy Daniels. And there is reporting that while he's writing these checks every month, right before that had a meeting with a head of state or a senator, and here the president is consumed in covering up what Cohen did. And he's directing Donald Trump Jr. and Alan Weisberg at the Trump organization to cook the books. He doesn't want to just write these checks out of his personal account. He does that a couple times, but then he says, I got to cover my tracks. And so he tells the Trump organization, you write the check out of the Trump organization and make it about legal services. That's financial fraud. I mean, any company, it would be financial fraud. You can't tell a company to cook their books and start paying people for services that weren't rendered. So I have no doubt that the Southern District of New York is looking into this, and that's why I think the president has huge legal exposure in the Southern District of New York. But I also am convinced that the Oversight Committee, my committee, is going to continue to look into this. We're going to call Alan Weisselberg to testify. We're going to try to get Ronna Graff, the president's personal assistant, and others in the organization.
I mean, you guys are put in this awkward situation that if you uncover crimes, but the Speaker of the House, who's in your party, has said we're not going to investigate impeachment, I got to ask you, what do you do? Because I don't know what you would do. How do you handle that situation?
Well, she gave herself an out. She said if there was convincing evidence of a high crime and misdemeanor, then we need to act. And I think that we've got to see what's in the Mueller report. And my view is there's going to be some pretty explosive conclusions on obstruction of justice at the very least. We need to see where these committees lead and where the Southern District of New York leads, and then make a determination. But Nancy Pelosi should not be, I think, prejudging the issue. And I say that as someone, I would say, there's no reason to prejudge the issue either way. If we're jurors that have the responsibility to conduct this investigation and then make a determination, I just don't see what's gained by saying that we aren't going to pursue a particular path.
Okay, and that makes sense, and I think that's where a lot of the American people are. So let me stay in Democratic Party politics for one more minute here. So there are some significant rumors, for good reason, that there will be primaries, which happens every year, every election cycle. But since a number of people won in primaries against incumbent Democrats, last time around, there seems to be more concern within Washington. What is your stance in general about primaries?
I think they're a good thing. Competition is healthy for democracy. How can anyone not be for competition, for healthy primaries, for more people running? I beat an incumbent. That's how I got to Congress. I had 4 people run against me the last time when my first reelection. I debated my opponents. I went to editorial board meetings with my opponents. I treated them with respect, and I was fortunate to win. So I don't understand why anyone needs to fear competition.
That would make sense. Certainly, people who beat incumbents, it would be weirdly hypocritical to say you should not challenge incumbents. But unfortunately, a lot of folks in that building do think that way. Okay, but Khanna is not among them, and he was early to the Justice Democrats. He's early to Bernie Sanders' campaign, early to the issue of Yemen, and to higher wages at places like Walmart and Amazon, and he has proved prescient on all of those grounds. So great to have you with us as well, always, Congressman.
Well, thank you, Cenk, and I just want to commend Justice Democrats, because I think it has changed the thinking on money and politics in the building. It's changed the thinking about grassroots organizing, and I think it's given people courage to get up and run and to say, I can do this. If AOC could do it, if Rashida Tlaib could do it, if Pramila could do it, I can get involved. So your work is changing politics, and I'm confident Bernie is going to take that to a new level, a new heights in 2020.
All right, Representative Khanna, thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks.
Thank you, Jane.